The elderly, the disabled and children. Hard choices, Labour always call it. But the truth is, never has there been a more cowardly government in my memory, punching down on those with the least say, the least power, the least leverage, the easiest choice for cowards to make, as these are. It has now emerged that Keir Starmer's Labour government is presiding over a schools funding crisis that threatens to derail the education of an entire generation. A staggering £700 million shortfall in schools' budgets for the 2025-26 academic year means that 76% of British primary schools and 94% of secondary schools will be unable to cover their costs. An unforgivable funding gap that is a direct result of the government's failure to prioritise education, invest in the next generation of this country, even as billions are poured into defence spending and financial and military aid goes to Ukraine. Once again, these are the optics of Starmer's government's spending choices. The consequences of these cuts speak for themselves, as the next generation will be left ill-equipped to build a Britain fit for the future. It is unforgivable inaction, the justification the government has given even more so, and the warnings have been issued and ignored, and we still have 4 more years of this sham of a government to go. Right, so the scale of the schools funding crisis is frankly staggering. Schools across the UK are facing a collective shortfall of £700 million in the 2025-26 academic year. This means that the vast majority of primary and secondary schools will be forced to make cuts, with devastating consequences as that will obviously have for the quality of education. Class sizes are likely to increase, extracurricular activities will be slashed, and essential resources such as textbooks and technology will be in short supply. Teachers, already overworked and underpaid, will face even greater pressures as they struggle to deliver a high-quality education with dwindling resources, and teacher recruitment, which has been dire for years, will not likely improve. This crisis is not just a failure of funding, though. It's a failure of vision. Education is the foundation of a prosperous and equitable society. Yet the government has chosen to prioritise other areas such as defence and giving away billions to Ukraine over the needs of our children as well. Or to put it another way, our kids pay the price so the rich don't pay a penny more, because that is obviously where the government could get this money from if they chose to. The government's decision to increase spending in some areas by billions of pounds, or refusing to raise taxes on those who can certainly pay a tiny bit more, while cutting schools' budgets, is a clear indication of completely misplaced priorities. Keeping the rich obscenely rich and donating to political parties and politicians like theirs, or investing in weapons and war but not in the future of our children, is a blatant dereliction of duty. It's a blatant mismanagement of this country. And it's a threat to UK prosperity, to all of us, that all of us could share in going forwards. Now, some of you might be minded to cast your mind back towards the introduction of VAT on private school fees. Wasn't that supposed to raise the money for this, Damo? Well, yes, it was, wasn't it? This policy was supposedly going to raise funds for state schools, but it has been undermined completely by high inflation, triggered by the economic mismanagement of our Chancellor of a Chancellor, Rachel from Accounts. Now, you might figure that critics of this plan might have got it right as well. They claimed that the VAT hike would lead to an exodus of pupils from private schools, a drop in their income, therefore no additional revenue would be raised at all. That's certainly been proved wrong, as the numbers are stable, has been reported, despite VAT, and this exodus has not therefore materialised. The School Cuts Coalition, a group of teaching trade unions and education organisations, have been vocal in their criticism of the government's handling of school funding. In a parliamentary briefing, the coalition warned that the current level of funding is unsustainable, well, not surprised there, and that schools are being pushed to breaking point. The coalition has called for urgent action to address the funding gap, including increased investment in education and a review of the government's spending priorities. Well, I should think so as well. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, they've also weighed in on this. They've issued stark warnings about the state of school budgets. According to them, rising costs, particularly in areas such as energy and staff salaries, are outpacing increases in funding. This means that even schools that receive additional funding are likely to see their budgets stretched to the limit. The IFS has warned that without significant investment, the quality of education in the UK will continue to decline, with long-term consequences for the economy and society. So what the Department of Education have to say for this, then, Damo? What have they got to say in light of all of this, then? They should have plenty to say, you might think. Well, What have they got to say for themselves? That's the sort of thing you tell a student, isn't it? Tell them to stand in the corner. What have you got to say for yourself? Well, they've accused schools of mismanaging their budgets. Oh, what a surprise. Here's an excerpt from Schools Week to explain. The Department for Education said it trusted schools to manage their own budgets, and the vast majority are operating with a cumulative surplus, with a minority having a deficit. Schools will be expected to fund this pay award from the additional investment provided at the budget, alongside their existing funds. For many schools, this will mean reprioritising some of their budget to go towards new pay costs, as well as more generally ensuring best value from overall resources. The department will be developing in partnership with the sector a suite of productivity initiatives to help schools manage their budgets to maximise opportunities for learners. A spokesperson said they recognise the challenges schools are facing, but the £22 billion black hole the government inherited means that fixing the foundations of the economy will take time, and tough decisions are needed across the public sector to get our finances back under control. Oh, so that's all awfully convenient, isn't it? Schools now have to pay for the extra pay they're having to give teachers in order to make them stay in the job, yet still vaguely explained in light of that £22 billion fiscal black hole, which is back in the narrative. This dismissive attitude is not only insulting to school leaders and the teachers, who know damn well they don't have these budget surpluses and who are working tirelessly to provide the best possible education with limited resources, but also demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding of the challenges facing schools. The reality is that schools are being asked to do more with less. Again and again and again. On top of the 14 years of the Tories, they've already had to do that. And no amount of financial management or gymnastics can compensate for a £700 million shortfall. The government's refusal to acknowledge the scale of the crisis is unforgivable. Instead of taking responsibility for their failures, the government is shifting the blame onto the schools themselves, further undermining morale and confidence of parents in the education system. This approach is not only drastically short-sighted, but it's dangerous, as it risks alienating the very people who are working to ensure that our kids receive a high-quality education, too many of whom are still leaving the vocation. The government's failure to invest in education is compounded no end, however, when you realise it is part of a broader pattern of neglect when it comes to children and families. You see, the Department for Work and Pensions, the DWP, yes, them again, a hot topic as they are already with all the talk of stripping of disability benefits to come from the most severely disabled people, have already stripped 170,000 children of their disability benefits as part of its managed migration programme onto universal credit from the older so-called legacy benefit system. It seems when it came to benefit cuts from Starmer's Labour, they actually started with kids. An excerpt from the Canary, who have doggedly kept up with stories relating to social security, reads, "The latest DWP data shows that 22% of people lost their benefits due to universal credit's managed migration, in total over 330,000 people, 222,000 households. The majority of these were households with children, 135,000, who claimed both child tax credit and working tax credit. The data shows overall that when you put all the different benefit combinations together, the DWP has stripped at least 170,000 children of their parents' benefits. Also, the majority of people losing out were women. Keir Starmer's Labour government has failed to shield our children from the impact of its own cuts. The £700 million shortfall in school budgets is another betrayal of our children and a failure to invest in the future of our country. The government's flawed policies meant VAT raised from private schools went up in smoke, while its dismissive response to warnings from the School Cuts Coalition and the IFS demonstrates a lack of leadership and vision. The government just continues to fail this country over and over again, and it's so hard to believe they've only been in power for 8 months, because it already feels like years. Even worse than defunding kids and defunding the disabled, defunding those on benefits, very often both, is the fact that this Labour shower can be bought up by the same wealthy people they refuse to raise any form of taxation on. It seems Rachel Reeves got lobbied by the rich to lay off the non-doms, and now we have all these stories about cuts showing what Labour is preparing to strip funds from to avoid upsetting the elites they bow down to and take money from. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe to ensure you don't miss out on all new content published daily, as well as supporting the channel, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.